Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Optimization and Consensus Building for Dummies. I'm Becca Rosenblatt, an event coordinator here at Deltek. Joining me today is Tom Poland, Solutions Architect here at Deltek. Welcome, Tom.
Hi, thanks, Becca. And Becca, confirm for me that you can see the stool slide up on the screen now. I just want to make sure we're broadcasting good. Cool, cool, awesome. Thanks, everyone, for joining, whether you're new to the series or if you've been hanging on with us throughout the different disciplines that we've discussed in project planning. Welcome. We will be starting off with some recap today, but then we will be getting into the very important topic of optimization, communication, and consensus, which is going to round out our series today. And at the end, as we have with the past presentations, we'll be showing you where you can get some more information. In fact, you'll be able to see the book on which this presentation series was based. It's freely available. We have hard copies that we hand out at conferences, but we have an ebook that you can literally download today, and it's the same as the printed version. I like the ebooks. I keep them on my tablet. I always have them handy when I want to brush up on these topics. So, like I said, let's do a little recap, and then let's get into the topic at hand today. What we've been talking about is last week when I was on with Kim Koster, we talked about this three-legged stool of scope, which includes the elements of time, cost, and quality. Like a three-legged stool, if you lose any one of these legs, it falls down. It doesn't work. In fact, we'll be talking about some new concepts today that work almost exactly the same from the optimization standpoint. Really the key to get started on this, the first leg that gets built in the schedule, on the stool is the time aspect, the schedule itself, then the schedule quality, bringing cost into the equation, and assuring that all those legs point up to the scope. Because if we're not executing to the scope, what are we executing? So we need the legs, but we need the seat too. We need that as the foundation, and always oriented towards the scope. Let's talk a little more about that as we recap the S1 to S5 project maturity framework. Now we have these clever purple check marks here to show you what we've covered so far in the series. S1, the base, developing the initial plan. Newer concept, S2, critiquing that plan in a number of different ways. Some quantitative and many qualitative at the same time, doing that very quickly and revisiting the S1 to S2 processes until we can pass that critique phase with flying colors. S3, risk adjusted, taking into account the things that can and maybe will go wrong as you're executing your project, being proactive, communicating this information, getting consensus on the risk information, and building it into the plan, rather than keeping it separate from the plan. Now, S3 is great. I've seen it work very well. It's a very well-intentioned process. However, there's a consequence of doing S3 very well. Often, you can end up with a very pessimistic version of your schedule that assumes many things will go wrong. Now, through simulation and refinement, we try to prevent that. But teams that I've worked with do tend to spend more time discussing risk and liens on the project than they spend discussing opportunities. It seems to be easier to talk about the things that delay a project than to talk about things that are opportunistic for our project. But that side of the discussion can't be ignored. In fact, we have tools that can help us do that because we know it's not an easy process. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. We're talking concepts today, but hey, we're Deltek, we're a software company. We have the tools to back these things up. S5, team alignment, communicating the risk-adjusted, optimized information to the right people at the right level of detail at the right time so they have the confidence whether to go in and begin executing this plan or execute it with caution, knowing that there's still some refinements we need to make from the S1 to the S4 processes. Let's talk about how this works. Let's make it a little more real. And we're going to start with a case study here where a project schedule, real project from a client that we've worked with, they had a target stakeholder goal date of December 1st, 2013. In the process of creating a sound schedule, removing things like hard constraints, filling in logic where there was none, turning leads and lags into real activities with real descriptions, scope, and resources assigned to them, guess what happened? The schedule didn't come in earlier. The higher quality, more realistic version of the schedule went out to May 2014. Some rough math, that's 6 months. Enter the risk-adjusted schedule, taking into account the risk register and the variability of just getting certain types of work done. Created almost a 1-year schedule delay in this project. Now, fortunately, we were doing this at the point of project baseline. There weren't like 3 weeks to go, and then we realized there was like 10 months to go. We're doing this during the planning phase. I can't emphasize that enough. Although this is still a valuable activity and valuable things to do during program execution, certainly can't be ignored. The best time to start is right now, and hopefully right now is before we're off executing the project. Now, through the techniques that we're going to discuss today, they're variable techniques, but there's a set of guidelines and parameters that you yourself can establish for your project. Through that, the accelerated time frame for this project, with risk accounted for, with a quality schedule, was actually earlier than the targeted date. So at baseline, you've got two things at work here. You have the potential ability to finish early, and if you don't plan on finishing early, you've got some schedule margin, knowing that some of these risks might run beyond what you anticipated, in which case schedule can be allocated and resources potentially can be allocated to those areas during execution. This seems all too convenient, but with what I'm going to be talking about with you today, the techniques that we can employ, I've seen this time and time again be able to be accomplished and certainly get the project done either within a few days of December 1st or even earlier. Team approved, some S5 there. We'll jump into that in a bit. Let's talk about some of the questions that a stakeholder, program manager, executive, or even the members of the team might have on their mind when they begin working on a project. Can we add more resources? If so, what will that buy me? Can we conduct work in parallel? And will that be beneficial? So for each one of these questions, I kind of have a follow-up. Is if the answer is yes, well, we still need to question if that's the right answer. Can we recover from slips and delays? In other words, do we have the contingency? Do we have that margin where if an unanticipated event goes wrong, do we have a high enough quality schedule to show the impact, absorb the impact, and continue executing in line with our stakeholder expectations? Can we accelerate the P schedule? We talked about these P schedules in our risk seminar. If we want an 80% probability and that date, that 80% probability date is 3 months past where we need it, can we develop an 80% confidence to an earlier date? That's squarely what we'll be talking about today. And the question really on everybody's mind, both before the baseline's established, while the baseline's being established, and during program execution, can we finish on time? And that's a huge question that involves things like knowing your critical path, managing risk in real time so that any one risk that pops up mid-cycle can be mitigated and allow us to continue to answer yes to this question. In other words, let me spend another minute on that can we finish on time question. It sounds so simple. It's the most complicated question on the screen here. And the reason is it can be so volatile. We can go through 50, 60, 75% of project execution and answer yes to that. And the moment we're in a situation where we have to answer no, it's irreversible. From my experience, it's irreversible. Is it mathematically, is it technically irreversible in every case? No, there's the potential to reverse it. However, if your answer was yes for 75% of the project, and then all of a sudden it was no, well, what can we do earlier than 75% to find no and fix it before no becomes the irreversible answer. Sorry, that was a little bit abstract, but that's kind of what I'm driving towards here, is preemptive, proactive optimization of your project. So that answer can be yes on day 1, day 100, and at project completion as well. Let's get right into it here. I'm just saying, oh, I'll show you the techniques, I'll show you the tactics. Well, I hate when people say that. Just show them to me now. Goal-based acceleration is what we're talking about. This is an emerging practice. It's really a new technique for accelerating to a certain goal. And really, before I tell you what that is and talk about being too aggressive and too conservative, let's talk about some of the other methods that I myself have used and you may have used if you've been in schedule and project-focused environments. One of my favorites, and this is funny, I'm going to talk about a funny conversation that I had with my wife yesterday about something unrelated, is I told her, we were going out to lunch yesterday, and I had pulled into the house in my car, and she said, oh, that's great, I'll meet you out in the driveway. And I said, actually, let's get in your car and go. And she said, why? And I said, well, the air conditioner is going out in my car. We live in Arizona, and air conditioning, even this time of the year in your car, is almost essential. It certainly is in the house. And she said, oh, your air conditioner's going. I said, yeah, I'm going to need a new car. And she said, well, what else is wrong with your car? I said, oh, nothing. It's in great shape. But, the air conditioning's out. I'm just going to have to buy a new one. She said, a new air conditioner? I said, no, a new car. And she said, wait a minute. That's not optimal. You're being too aggressive. You don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. In other words, if you just, an air conditioner in a car is a bolt-on accessory. I like to have an expert do it, or Freon and other chemicals and things like that. I said, no, new car. And she said, come on, you're being ridiculous. I said, absolutely I am. I said, it's probably the least efficient way to fix the air conditioning in my car would be just to get a new car, when they can unbolt the existing one, bolt the new one on, and set it up and be more optimal about it. And so we laughed, ha. But it really does, that kind of approach is actually often used to accelerate projects. And let me tell you how. I've been asked a number of times after I've built a schedule to hold reserve on the schedule. And we did it one simple way. In fact, I wrote a macro for it. We took 10% away from every activity, 10% of duration and potentially resource time away from every activity on the schedule. The schedule calculated to an earlier date, usually about 10% sooner. We patted ourselves on the back for this advanced technique of giving what the engineers, what they called a haircut on their durations. And what we trained them to do, the unintended consequence of that 10% haircut, was next project, or even later in the estimates of this project, they learned to pad their estimates by 10%, so that when they took the 10% haircut, they got to where they really wanted to estimate. So as smart as we thought we were being, we were actually propagating, I guess, something we could call in the category of worst practice. Being too conservative with our estimates, knowing that they're going to be cut in an aggressive and inefficient fashion. In the end, what we accomplished was very little, because we shot all over the place to get this acceleration instead of doing what we're talking about here, goal-based and optimal acceleration. We're going to talk about how that works. I've got some very good slides, very meaty slides coming up as to how you can accomplish that, how you can set the parameters, and how you can let software take the ball from those parameters and give you different scenarios that you, as humans, evaluate. You don't let the computer make the decisions, but you let the computer very quickly crunch the numbers that are going to help you arrive at decisions. So what we're talking about here, let's talk about some of the mechanics. I'll keep it pretty light. I realize not everyone out there is as into scheduling as some of us are. But what we're going to do is go beyond traditional CPM, critical path method scheduling. Generally, you just calculate your schedule once, maybe every week or every month. what we're going to do with goal-based acceleration is actually simulate your schedule, much like a risk analysis. In the optimization analysis, we're going to simulate your schedule hundreds, maybe even thousands of times, but just in a few seconds. The system gets busy with that and finds these optimal scenarios where it's only affected some key targeted activities with the fewest number of changes to get the most schedule efficiency. In other words, the method I described where we got rid of the car because it needed a new air conditioner, or we cut every activity by 10%, that is the most number of changes you can make to get schedule recovery. Or if you get rid of the car because of the air conditioner and get a new car, that is the most number of changes you can make to your car to fix the air conditioning because you're buying a whole new car. Very inefficient. It's cost inefficient. It's material inefficient. And this is the same thing. If we just cut everybody's tasks, we're being completely inefficient, and then we have those unintended consequences that I talked about too. So what it boils down to, we're going to be expanding on step 2 here. Step 1, setting the finish goal. What your ideal date for finish. You don't be shy. You really go for the gusto here, finding the best date possible, maybe even earlier than your stakeholder date, because we talked about a little margin before. The sweet spot in this, which we'll be expanding on, which is how, when, and why to define the criteria that are allowable to be altered to meet that finished goal, and then generating the scenario, which is something that the system does, and then you have the luxury of reviewing those and refining, maybe even going back to steps 1 and 2. Let's talk about what this means. Here we go. Goal-based simulation. Define the target you're trying to hit. Is it a 10% cut? Is it get to first oil sooner by 3 months? Is it a particular date that you've committed to in the proposal phase that now appears to be in jeopardy? So you need some optimization. You need some goals, and you need a way to get to those goals. Now let's get into it here with these criteria. What might they be for yours? They might be similar to this. They might be something different. In my example here, I'm going to talk about reducing project duration by 20% and removing the hard constraints in the plan, which might be artificially driving us toward a 20% cut or artificially driving us away from a 20% cut. I don't want artificial. I want true CPM scheduling. Those hard constraints undermine my schedule calculations every single time with every single iteration of this schedule, so I want them out. I might put some back in later, but I'm going to take them out while I do this exercise because I want the real deal. I want the real calculations, not calculations that have been altered by humans. We're going to talk more about that. I have this really great top 10 list at the end. It's the best 2 slides here. If you lose the rest, don't lose the last 2 because we talk about dates versus calculations, and it's extremely important for what we're doing here. Okay, now to get myself back on track here. Targeting, filtering, in this case, filtering for construction activities. Either filtering on them because we think that's a targeted area where we can make efficiencies, or doing the opposite, saying accelerating construction would bring resource and safety constraints. We don't want those problems, so let's anti-target construction. Let's put a protective shield on construction so that we don't alter their activities. And then finally, each of the disciplines that we can accelerate may have hundreds, maybe even thousands of tasks. We want to start the simulation, the scenario development, somewhere in those thousands of tasks. Does that mean the longest tasks first? The theory being, hey, it's tough to cut 10 days off of a 20-day task, but 10 days off of a 100-day task might be more feasible. Do we target the latest activities first, the ones furthest out in the plan? Why? Well, we're anticipating having more resources next year, but we're running it pretty lean this year. Earliest first, hey, we have resources now. Let's get the most work done earliest in the project, knowing we might have some constraints later on. And then easiest first, where are the areas of the schedule where we only have 1 or 2 activities going on that could be expedited versus areas of the schedule that have 10, 20, 30 parallel where we would need to make changes just to accelerate a single day. these things that I have, these criteria that I have up on the screen right now, computers are not good at coming up with what these should be for your project. Computers are very good at taking instructions like this and having you evaluate and rank these priorities, and then going off and doing the strenuous work, the heavy lifting in the schedule based on the criteria that you've defined. So you don't get to turn your brain off when you do this, and you don't get to send the team on vacation. They very much have to be a part of this process, but they don't have to do the manual labor associated with putting these criteria into action. That's what the computer is going to do when you do this final step here, which is generate the scenario. And I love this up on the right, because this is exactly what I'm talking about. Frees up the planner's brain, and really the team's brain, to focus on analyzing the results and making highly informed decisions regarding which scenario to adopt. You only have so many brain cycles in a day. I read a great article on this just this morning or last night that talks about how really smart people, really effective people, don't spend time making small decisions. They let the small decisions just be themselves. They don't even make the decisions. They were talking about how some of these very successful executives and entrepreneurs wear the same clothes every day because they don't want to waste time figuring out from a wardrobe of 20 or even hundreds of different outfits what to wear. They just go with the standby favorites so that they can focus their brain on things like analysis and making the decisions that count, that steer their business more effectively. I thought it was interesting. I had no idea I was going to bring up clothing in this presentation. So let's talk about the simulation and this heavy lifting piece, the what ifs. Do you want to spend your day generating what ifs? I don't. Let's have the computer generate the what ifs based on the criteria that we've put in motion and the instructions that we've given the computer. So right here, we maintain the control. It's not going to go off and make decisions that we didn't give it permission to make. And also, this works best when you include the team. I want construction to stand up and say, hey, I have safety concerns if we try to do this more quickly. Because what they might say is we do have opportunities to work more quickly if we do a buy versus a make on some of these construction parts, some of these forms that we're building. Hey, terrific. So they might be the first ones to put up the stop sign, but they might also be the first ones to turn on the green light for acceleration. I want them there at the table, either real on a table in front of me or virtually through collaborative tools. The key here, too, is then to create and evaluate scenarios until you reach, and I think this is great. Jen, who's on the line, she's fielding any questions that you have in the GoToWebinar control panel. She wrote a great statement here. The intersection of achievability, team buy-in, and project goals. If you can get all three of these from a schedule, you have a great schedule, especially if it meets the project goals and the team has bought in. And the team also believes that it's achievable. This is its own stool. This is we'll call this the stool of acceleration. If you compromise any one of these, you don't have a credible, accelerated, optimized plan. If you can say green on achievability, green on buy-in, and green that you're meeting the project goals, you have an accelerated, optimized plan that the team should be able to live with and execute on time or ahead of schedule. Like I said, if you don't have any one of these three, you have an unrealistic plan. So this is the litmus test right here. You need 3 yeses: achievability, buy-in, project goals. Here's your plan out here. If you evaluate it using our snazzy tools, and you can say yes to these, you're probably good to go. From that point, you're generating scenarios. Are you generating one scenario? No. You might generate a dozen different scenarios where the system has gone in the allowable areas of the schedule to dissect, and it's come up with different strategies. And here I have different strategies that come out to different dates, but they involve compromise, optimization, and acceleration in different areas of the plan. Conversations are going to need to be had. I guarantee it. We can't just go to accelerated scenario 2, which has the earliest project finish date, and say that's our plan. We need to discuss as a team the pros and cons of each one of these plans. I'll tell you the con of plan number 2 here is it runs longer. But the pro might be that it's more achievable and it better passes the litmus test we had on the previous page. Just so I get it right, achievability, team buy-in, and project goals. This third one down here may be a little light on the achievability. And if we think it's so light on achievability that it's not feasible, it's time to cross this one off, go into number 2 here, the accelerated scenario, number 1, and make 3 versions of that. So this can be an evolutionary process. This is how companies pick out logos and other, graphic art type stuff. Is a logo designer might give them 3 choices. They pick one, then based on that one, the designer gives them 3 more choices until they narrow down to the very specific one that'll work best. It can work exactly the same way here. Let's talk about the next level down, how you compare these. I'm putting up a grid, a grid of information. It is the activities on the project grouped by WBS. I have a risk-adjusted scenario in the center column here. And on the right-hand side, these first 2 tasks, well, that's the project finish. Actually, most of these tasks wouldn't require aggressive acceleration or even acceleration at all on the plan. In fact, the overall project is going to have to accelerate by 191 days. But concept, alternate scenario development, early design, and feed, they actually don't need to make cuts at all. So further down, I should have put a second one of these up with construction on here because I'll bet they need to make the cuts for an overall cut of 191 days. The takeaway here is, in my old world, every one of these WBS areas would be subject to a 10% cut. In this case, these blue durations are increased. I don't want to get too technical here, but these blue durations are increased. These areas can actually take longer, and our scenario still gives us 191 days of acceleration. In other words, the sometimes awkward acceleration discussions aren't going to need to happen with every member of the team. They're only going to have to happen with certain key areas of the schedule. In fact, as I mentioned, these 4 aren't even those areas. They don't need to come to the meeting. I'd like them to know the information, but they don't need to be active participants. Let's talk about new schedule scenarios and how we work with them. The system will produce new scenarios. They're real schedules that can be pulled back into the scheduling tool for management and execution. So now that creating the schedule scenario is really easy, it's important to pick the right ones. Here's some example questions that might be asked during this tactical process of selecting the right schedule. Hey, the system came back with a 3-month acceleration. How can we support it? Do we have the resources? In other words, do we pass the achievability test? If the answer is yes, let's keep talking. If the answer is no, let's find out the resource deficiencies and figure out whether we're able to get resources in those areas, or we can do a buy versus make or something like that. In other words, trade money for resources that we don't have. Same vein. Could we get back on track by adding resources to construction? If the answer is yes, we have more questions to ask. Are those resources available? Can we get contract labor in a short turnaround? And if we do, will those resources be experienced enough for the type of construction that we're doing so that they'll add value rather than being a drain on the program? And third, I like this one a lot. Can we define a stretch goal and incentivize the contractor? In other words, we feel like there's a very realistic plan in place today. Can we do better? Can we turn up the heat a little bit, put a stretch goal in, and put some money behind it, put some incentives behind it? Maybe it's money. Maybe it's future business. Maybe it's something that contractor could really use. And it's not a guarantee that they can meet the stretch goal, but we know they can't if we don't try, if we don't communicate it, and then put some incentive behind it. Our ultimate goals can be time savings. Oh wait, the way that we can do this, the methods that we can do this will save us a lot of time. In other words, we can get to these questions and these conversations using a good tool that supports the S4 process, where we can do thousands of iterations just in a few seconds and start using the best scenarios that come out of that to start answering these questions right away. That gets us into buy-in and collaboration. What are the questions to ask? Do we have the right people looking at those questions? Do we have the right people answering those questions and the right people reviewing the answers? This is where the team has to be a team. There's no substitute for this. There's no software that does this for you. There's software like our RiskBook product that does this with you, but it doesn't do it for you. It never will. This comes into play, this collaboration comes into play throughout, but there's a few key times with what I'm talking about today. And this is when the system generates those candidate schedules, we need humans working together to decide which candidate scenario schedules are going to pass that litmus test or have the best chance of being achievable with team buy-in and meeting the project goals. We're going to evaluate the achievability using consensus by evaluating risk. It's very easy to say a project can be done in a year. It's easy for an individual with a limited view to say that. Once you start involving the team in the feasibility of a one-year completion, they should be encouraged to bring up the things that would prevent the project from finishing in a year so that we can mitigate them. I don't want people to be yes men and women when that conversation takes place. I want a certain amount of pessimism at the table, and then I want us to work together to mitigate the pessimism. I don't want to mitigate it by not talking about it. I want to mitigate it by putting it out on the table, having people vote, like you can see on this voting screen here, as to which items have the highest reasonability of occurring, and then the most impact if they do occur, and then we're going to mitigate. And then next month, once we've mitigated the first set, I'm going to say, hey folks, what's going to hurt us this month? Which are the most important ones? Which are the most reasonable ones for where we are right now? And how do we mitigate them? So we're going to rinse and repeat every single month, both during the baseline phase and then throughout program execution as well. We're going to vote here down the center, and then we're going to discuss it here on the right. 10 thoughts. And like I said, these are 2 key slides, both to this session and to the whole series. No cart before the horses. Dates are the output of CPM, critical path method scheduling, not the beginning. This is true at S1. This is true at S2 for the schedule critique. So S1 is the schedule development. Don't key the dates in. Some scheduling software will let you just type dates in. Don't do it. Use the relationship and predecessor-successor logic that's available to you in the scheduling tool to do this. Some tools enforce this better than others, but they all, if it's a CPM-based scheduling tool, it allows you to add predecessor and successor logic. That's what you should be leaning on. Detail-oriented, I can't tell you the right answer here. It's not as easy as number 1 where I say, yeah, use logic. Number 2, the level of detail depends on the project. I don't like 100-day, 200-day activities. I don't know, on a 20-year project, those might be reasonable durations. On a 6-month project, I don't want to see 100-day durations. So detail-oriented as it applies to the work at hand on your project. Get started, then get on with it. Developing your schedule is a starting point, not the finish. It's going to be evolutionary, and it needs to be revisited early and often during program execution. Those problems that undermine project execution are often going to manifest themselves in the first 20% of project execution. Seen it time and time again, where the performance in the first 18 to 20% of the project is the performance efficiency that we will see at the end of the project. It's a little daunting in a way. you wish that at 40% you could do something magical, and sometimes you can, but you often can't. Number 4, metrics are no replacement for your brain. Making a sound schedule doesn't replace you as the captain of the ship. You'll never hear me say that the team can be replaced by computer algorithms and metrics. It's simply not true. Computer algorithms and metrics are at the service of the project team. We still make the decisions. These things that we're talking about are decision support. The key for us is getting you to those decision support products, artifacts, schedules as quickly as possible so that your decisions are made as early as possible and have the most time to be effective. Number 5, risk is not a 4-letter word. Well, it is, but it's not. It's not a bad word. It's not something that should be avoided. That pessimism should be put right out on the table so that we can have real productive discussions about it. Putting your head in the sand doesn't make risk go away. I wish it did. You'd really just get sand in your ears and in your hair and sometimes in your eyes. It's no fun. Now I want to go to the beach. Number 6, there is always room for improvement. It's interesting, and this is really true of the S1 to S5. We put them in sequence, which is cool, because it is the sequence in which they should first be done. Establishing the schedule, critiquing the schedule, risk adjusting the schedule, optimizing the schedule, and then communicating the schedule. But through the baseline process and through execution, there is always opportunity to improve. And these are things that once the baseline is quote-unquote baked, which it really isn't, because you can always, like we say here, you can always do better. There's no reason why I can't do a what-if optimization exercise at any point in program execution. In the past, I wouldn't have wanted to because it's time-consuming. Now I can do it in an instant and see what the impacts would need to be to meet that date. Why not do it? Why not look at those opportunities for improvement to balance out the risk assessments, the monthly risk assessments that we may already be doing? So give me the bad news, but let's try to find the good news as well. Let's not do that once. It's quick to do. Let's do that as early and often as possible. Love number 7, don't always trust a computer. Never trust a computer. Okay, sometimes trust a computer. This is clever. We have some really cool techniques here. Some things like the S4 that have never been done before with a computer. But it's not gospel. It's not going to tell you the right answer. It's going to give you the highest possibility of a select group of schedules in which may be the right answer if it suits your team and if it passes the achievability, buy-in, and project goal litmus test. Number 8, this is some tough love here, right here. Poor execution's a cop-out. Projects don't fail because of poor execution. The projects we've seen, the projects we've been enlisted to do forensic analysis on, when we go back and unfortunately retroactively look at the baselines of poorly executed projects, we spot the problems in the baseline that manifested themselves throughout execution almost every time. I want to say every time because I can't think of any examples where we haven't, but I'll weasel a little bit and say almost every time. We look at successful projects and we talked about this on our S2 webcast, we look at successful projects and we don't see the habits back in their baseline that manifested themselves through the poorly executed projects. In other words, it would be easy to say, hey, this project was poorly executed. There were the problems right there in the baseline. Because then we could also end up in a situation where we said, here's a well-executed project. Oh, we found those same problems in the baseline. No, actually we go in and we didn't find those problems in the baseline of the well-executed projects, which is the proof to us, and maybe also to you, that the quality counts. If you see a characteristic in a failed project that you don't see in a successful project, bottle that characteristic and make sure that characteristic is embedded in your future projects so that they have the highest possibility of success. Number 9, the team must be on board. You'll never be successful if the team isn't bought in. Mentioned that through and through. Number 10, this process works. Here's some real data put into easy pictures for me, for my benefit. We're talking 10% average reduction in project costs, 20% average acceleration, and 91% forecast accuracy. Let me put some numbers over on the right with these little pie charts here regarding forecast accuracy. 2 years in advance for Project A, we predicted this project in 1 day. Project B, actual date within 2 days, within 9 days, within 38 days, 2.5 years in advance. This still wasn't too shabby. It wasn't within a week or two like these two, but we're still talking very high predictability. Now there's a data point that's not here. Stakeholder date. Some of these may have been ahead of the stakeholder date. Some of those may have been behind. What I'm talking about here is realism. Stakeholder date might not be realistic. So when I say estimated date, I don't mean what somebody said we would do. I mean going through S1 to S5, leaning on the tools and the team along the way, coming up with an estimated date, and then see the project actually finish within a few days of that. This may have been early, it may have been late. We'd love it if it was early, and we'll keep trying to raise the bar until we are early. But inevitably, that might not be possible if a commitment was made that simply was impossible to meet. So yeah, we've got the targets, but why put them on here? We want to estimate exactly when we think you're going to finish using the S1 to S5 process. And with our software tools, it's something you can do yourself. You don't need us to come in and do it. We'd love to, but you don't need us to do it. Now let's kind of bring this home with discussion of a couple things that are coming up here. One's very exciting. This one's very exciting too. So two things. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Jen what kind of questions we have, but not yet, because I'm going to talk about these two things. One, this entire webinar series has been based on a book that's available right now for download, Planning a Great Project for Dummies. It goes through the whole S1 to S5 process. We also have recordings of each one of the webinars, if you like the sound of my voice. Scheduling for Dummies, Risk Management for Dummies, and most recently before this session, Cost Management for Dummies. These follow along the book. We bring our own real-world experience to the table, sometimes anecdotes about the air conditioning. We bring those to the table in the webinars. The book doesn't have those cool stories in it, so I don't know, watch the webinars, read the book, one or the other, however you like to learn. You get the opportunity to do that. The URL here, very easy, deltek.com/dummies. Get you right there. And by the way, pro tip, there's about 5 or 6 more Dummies books that are all related to contracting, program execution, ERP, earned value management. Check them out. It's not just this book. This is our latest. I think it's one of our best, if not our best. But there's more out there as well that are all related to what we're talking about here. So check them out. One more thing here, Deltek Insight 2014. I'm looking forward to it. I'm going to be there next week, November 12th of 2014, Gaylord Palms Resort and Convention Center, Orlando, Florida. Registration still open. I checked just beforehand that you could still register because it's coming up fast. If you haven't booked yet, tell your boss. You just won't be in the office next week. Head out to deltekinsight.com. Incredible keynote speaker. I give a little hint every week if you haven't checked it out yet. The keynote speaker this year identifies as an endurance artist. So go check that out, see who's speaking. It's pretty cool. And I'm going to put some contact information up on the screen here too for some more information about our products, our events. If you like to tweet, we're on the Twitter. And of course you can email us as well. Jen Weber, how's it going?
Good, Tom. We've got one or two questions here. The first one asks, it says you keep mentioning that the tool, Deltek offers tools to help with this. Can you walk through what they are and which stage of the process they apply to?
Yeah, actually, cool question. I'm sorry, I'm flipping back through all the slides here because I'm going to put the S1 to S5 up on the screen. I could have just exited. Okay, here we go, S1 to S5. So let's do a quick rundown of the tools. S1 is the scheduling tool you might already be using today. This is what I'm talking about when I say scheduling tool. Some of the names that are out there, Microsoft Project, Primavera, Deltek has its fine open plan scheduling project, my favorite. So S1 is laying the plan in place, and I know many of you are doing that today with your tool of choice. Where our unique to the industry tools come in is in the S2 phase. And our S2 product is called Deltek Acumen Fuse. This is where you critique your schedule and find out where you may have fallen into some of the common pitfalls and characteristics that are shared by unsuccessful projects. If I have my project look in the mirror, does it see an unsuccessful project or does it see a successful project? What are its characteristics? Number S3, this is Deltek Acumen Risk. Easy to remember because it's all about creating a risk-adjusted schedule. Taking your risk register, getting the consensus from your engineers and managers to say, hey, what's going to come to bite us on this type of project and how can we prevent it now? and actually building that into your plan, not just doing that as a discussion, actually building it into your plan. S4 is what we talked about today. This one's kind of cute in name. Deltek Acumen 360, a 360-degree view at your plan and what can be done to optimize your plan. S5 runs throughout all of these other tools. So S5 is not a separate tool. It's the reporting, communication, and consensus gathering tools within these. Along that line, I should mention Deltek Risk Book as well, which is a social and collaborative tool for getting to yes, taking into account the team's discussion of risks, optimization, and critiquing the plan as well as a team, whether they're in the same room or whether they're scattered about the globe. If they've got internet access, they can use Risk Book. So there's a quick rundown of the different products.
Okay, our next question is, you mentioned the importance of doing this during the planning phase. How often throughout the life cycle of the project should you run this kind of analysis and optimization?
Gotcha. I'm going to say as often as possible, but I'm going to back that up. But that sounds like it's a big check to cash. Oh yeah, just do all this baseline type activity every single week, every single month. But I do want it to be done at a minimum with every update cycle. But the key here is by leaning on software that knows what you're doing and where you are in the process, it's doing the time-consuming work for you very quickly so that it's not time-consuming for you. You're seeing the answers, you're seeing the scenarios, and you're able to make quick decisions on the fly to put those scenarios into action. And the computer really did the legwork, and you're the captain of the ship.
Okay, great. If there are no other questions, I think we'll hand it back to Becca to wrap things up.
Cool. Back over to you, Becca.
Thanks, Tom, and thanks, Jen. This concludes today's webinar, and thank you for joining us today. Please visit deltek.com for more upcoming Deltek events.